Hi, this is Len Edgerly. Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles podcast. Today is actually a day earlier than usual. It's Thursday, July 1st, and I'm going to put up the show tonight because tomorrow I'm driving to Burlington, Mass. to have a major tooth extraction, a molar, and I'm not sure if what shape I'm going to be in after that procedure. And also we have Jake and Ryan, our grandsons, spending the night with us tonight. So I want to clear the decks and enjoy having an evening with them. And then tomorrow make my appointment with the oral surgeon in Burlington. My interview this week is with an author who is here in Maine, just down east from here in Camden, Paul Doiron, D-O-I-R-O-N. That's a French name that I could imagine pronouncing it Doiron, but he says Doiron is, and he's got lots of ways that he's heard that name pronounced over the years. Terrific guy. Enjoyed talking with him yesterday, and he has a book which was released this week from Minotaur Books. That's an imprint of Macmillan, titled Dead by Dawn, and it features the game warden that is his character. This is the 12th book, so when I do the introduction to the interview, I'll give some more details on it. I'm also going to queue up a tech tip, tell you about a conversation or an incident that I had with Alexa that started out poorly but ended up pretty well, and I learned something in the process. For the tech tip, I have a story that involves our friend Alexa, and it started with, I listen to a lot of jazz. I usually just say, Alexa, play jazz, and I get these great stations or playlists. Stations, I guess she comes up, because there's a lot of variety. And the other day, a song was presented by a really haunting female vocalist, and it said on it, Laufey, L-A-U-F-E-Y. So I wanted to hear more music by this musician, but when I said, Alexa, play music by Laufey, I tried a couple of ways of saying it. She just couldn't find the musician, and she came up with a couple of names that were similar to it, but just wasn't able to find it. At that point, I thought, well, on the Alexa app on my iPhone, I can type in, there's sort of a chat ability to type messages to Alexa as opposed to using voice. And I was able, in that keyboard icon driven thing on the Alexa app, to type in play music by, and then just typing in the name. And sure enough, Alexa was able on the iPhone to bring the music up. But the problem was, it was my iPhone, and that's got a nice speaker, but certainly not like the Echo Show 10 and the other smaller Echo I've got here in this room. So I was still left wondering, how can I get this music onto the bigger speakers? I called Alexa support, actually, obviously got somebody very quickly, and the tech person wasn't able to help me with a workaround that was very satisfying. He said that there wasn't a way to type in that name on the Echo Show, which you could imagine. You pull up a keyboard when you're typing in passwords and things like that. So conceivably, you could have the same ability to have a chat session with Alexa on the Echo Show, but it apparently doesn't exist. So what he suggested was creating a playlist on my iPhone with Amazon Music, which I did, but I could never really get Alexa to get the music that way. Now, one thing I learned in doing some research on it, this is must be a fairly new and young artist. She's from Iceland, and she's also Chinese, and I think she's maybe living in the Boston area, and she has a debut album titled Typical of Me, released in April of this year. So, she doesn't have much of a presence on the internet yet, which is why maybe Alexa was having trouble finding it. But the way that I figured out to do this was to, let's see if I'll pull her up here and see if she can demonstrate how she handled this when I finally figured it out. Ugh, I'm knocking over things on my desk. Alexa, how do you pronounce the name spelled Laufey?
I pronounce that Laufey, but I'm always working on how I say things, and I might not have it right.
So that told me that if she was going to find the name spelled Laufey, she was going to pronounce it Lau. I'm taking that as rhyming with cow, and then fee. So with that information directly from Alexa, I was able to do this. Alexa, play music by Laufey.
Shuffling songs by Laufey on Amazon Music.
Alexa, stop. So that's kind of handy, if I'm looking for something and I know how to spell it, there is a way to have Alexa at least tell me how she would be saying it, and then I can use that as the way to narrow in on a voice search that isn't happening the first time or two. This is one of those tech tips where if you have a better workaround for this than the one I came up with on my own, I did get some help from that Amazon tech as well. I'd be curious to hear about it. And I think it would be a good improvement for the platform if you were able to engage with Alexa with the chatbot feature on the Echo Show the way you can on the iPhone. If you have any ideas on a more elegant way to solve this problem that I had, please email them to me at podchronicles@gmail.com. Time now for the interview. Paul Doiron earned an English degree at Yale and an MFA degree in creative writing at Emerson College in Boston. For 8 years, he served as editor-in-chief of Down East Magazine, a high-quality magazine about Maine, based in Camden, which is where Paul lives, a couple of hours north of here. Dead by Dawn is the 12th book in his Game Warden Mike Bowditch mystery series, published by Minotaur Books, and that's an imprint of Macmillan. I learned about Paul's work from his agent, Anne Rittenberg, who also represents the best-selling author C.J. Box, whose 21-book mystery series is based on a Wyoming game warden, Joe Pickett. I connected with Paul by Zoom on Wednesday, yesterday, the day that Dead by Dawn was released. And I began by asking if anything had surprised him in the very early reactions to the book.
It used to be such a big deal to every publication day. And I would wake up with this sense of excitement. And I don't want to say it was a letdown because it was always great. But, what you realize is that, just because you have a new book out doesn't mean that the focus is on you all day long. You're going through a normal sort of day and you have things set up. But I had a couple of events. I did my first in-person event at a bookstore inside, and that went really smoothly, and it made me feel good about sort of where we are with the pandemic in Maine, and
right.
And then I had a Zoom event in the evening, so it was quite busy from a publicity standpoint. But,
yeah, it must have felt good to be back at in person, because last year you had to do virtual for that book. And what was it like to actually be among your readers again?
It was really nice. I'm an introvert like a lot of writers, and I adjusted to the early months of isolation pretty well. And in fact, I think I probably wrote a better book because I was so isolated.
Interesting.
But I found that when the time came around to do my PR for the last book, and everything had moved to Zoom events, on one hand, I appreciated it because I could, it would be 8:00 and I just would have to put on a new shirt and sit down in front of the computer and there's the event.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I also missed the touring part of it, different aspects of it. I missed, primarily, just meeting people one-on-one, who had been waiting for the book to come out and came in and bought 3 copies to give to relatives. I even missed, though, kind of some of the travel, which is never, it's not half as glamorous as people think it is, to go on a book tour. But it made me realize that part of it too. There was something celebratory about that, right? You're on the road, going from bookstore to bookstore, and it was an important part of my year, but I didn't know it until I missed it.
Interesting. And now this year will be kind of a hybrid. You'll have some of each, I guess.
Yes. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, let's start. How does this story begin for Mike Bowditch?
So this is, as I said, the 12th book. And the way that I begin every book and sort of conceptually is I ask myself, where is Mike personally and professionally at the beginning of this book? And I try to come up with a plot for the novel that's going to illustrate whatever he's dealing with or struggling with, and sort of move him forward as a character. And I realized that after the last book, One Last Lie, which was a kind of a turning point in his life with his mentor, Charlie Stevens, who's always been there for him, has taught him, given him basically a PhD seminar in the Maine woods, and just been so important to him, the father he really should have always had, but he didn't. But I said, Mike needs now to have an experience where he's entirely on his own, where he has no one to call for help. He has, to draw on everything he's learned over his career so far, physically, in terms of his discipline, self-discipline, and, mentally. So that the way the book begins is with him coming down a hill on a road in his Jeep. It's December, it's dark, and he comes around a corner and there are spikes in the road that had not been there when he was going up the hill. And they cause the Jeep to veer off the road and drop into the half-frozen Androscoggin River. And he's almost instantly submerged. He has his wolf dog, Shadow, who's sort of a recurring character in the series, in a crate in the back of the Jeep, locked. And everything's sinking. The cabin is filling with icy water. It's dark. And his first thought is not of himself, but of the dog, that's going to drown. And he wants to get Shadow out of there. Of course, he wants to survive as well. And it's not giving a whole lot away to say that it's horror, but he gets out with the wolf. But then what happens with the structure of the book is that the chapters alternate. I'm sorry. So we have these present tense chapters with, that take place after the crash. Chapter 2 actually starts at the very beginning of that day when Mike is headed off to the vet. He's going to check in on this very persistent woman who wants him to sort of reopen a cold case that everybody assumes was just a drowning. And he's basically just doing it to humor her. But what happens is he gets sort of drawn into this personal investigation over the course of the day, and he uncovers something during these conversations that he has that cause somebody to want to kill him. And so we're flipping back and forth through the book between Mike trying to, first of all, get out of the river, fight off hypothermia, light a fire without matches, a lighter, sticks to rub together, all of this sort of the cliche stuff. Because hypothermia basically takes about 10 minutes to incapacitate you. And these chapters where he's kind of going through the day and meeting these increasingly creepy people that take him all the way up the hill that he ends up coming down and later. And so it's an unusual book for me. The tenses alternate. There are present tense chapters and there are past tense chapters. And then they all converge at the end, hopefully.
Yeah, it's an intriguing structure. I wondered when I realized that I think you'd referred to it. did you write one of the halves all at once and then the other half and then sort of cut and paste them to alternate, or would you shift from the present time and the survival to back to the earlier in the day, sort of the way the reader's experiencing it? Did you write it as the way we read it?
Yes, I wrote it as you read it. Yeah. And it was hard to do it that way, I have to say, because, I had to remember where I had left off with the survival situation, especially. But I think it made for a better book because, I tried to leave each chapter in a place where it was somehow resonating with, the present tense chapters picked up on something in the past. This is when he meets the first person that he thinks is out to get him, and then he's being shot at by, in the dark by who the person he assumed, that's, the guy that he assumes it is. And it's, it was really an interesting challenge to write a book that way.
Yeah, I'm sure I could see that. I came across one conversation you had where one of your previous books you set on a kind of a fictitious island that had echoes of Monhegan and others, and that it sort of evoked an Agatha Christie type of a story that, somebody on this island is the one who did it, like on a train. And I think this one you made some connections with Jack London. Is that something you've done in the past where a mystery writer who's meant a lot to you has given you kind of a frame for how one of your books goes, or are those two the only ones that have those kind of echoes?
No, I like to riff a little bit on the history of the mystery genre. And it's not just in the novels. I also published a short story this spring that's available as an e-short, so through Kindle, iBooks, that kind of thing, called The Caretaker, which is my version of a Sherlock Holmes story with Mike's mentor Charlie Stevens in the role of Holmes and Mike as his young Watson. And it's very, and in fact, actually, I don't make a habit of reading, Amazon reviews or good read reviews, but I happened to come across somebody who was entirely puzzled by it. He said, "Who wrote this? It feels like it's a British writer who wrote this story." Well done. And I'm like, all right, mission accomplished. So that's what I set out to do. Yeah. It was like when Mike became a warden investigator, which is a plainclothes detective, essentially, in the warden service. I tried to shift the style a little bit to more of what we think of as in the American tradition by Hammett and Chandler and that sort of thing, to sort of represent the change in his status is, but every book I try to do a little bit differently. And I've been saying this to people, but I had a woman come up to me and she said, "Oh, I love your books, because they're all the same, but they're all different."
Well, there you go.
Yeah, I think that is kind of what I hope to do with this series. Is I liked it, each book to have a certain freshness to it, but not be unrecognizable as part of this larger saga.
I had talked with C.J. Box, who's also represented by Anne Rittenberg, which is how you and I get together, and I've always been interested in people who write a successful series. How do they keep going and make it fresh? And Chuck does this thing where he takes on a topic, like some kind of a science topic, and he sets it in Wyoming, and there's the murder and all the usual stuff. But each book gives him a chance to learn something that he wants to spend time researching. And it seemed like your tool for keeping it fresh was very different and intriguing to me. And that was you're following the growth and evolution of this character of Mike through time. He starts out as a kind of a brash, impetuous 24-year-old. And it looks like he sort of tracks in real time the years going by in the publication, although it feels like he's growing up more slowly than he would if it was just tracking the one book a year, but roughly the same. I guess I wondered if by doing that, you've created a character, you sort of know who he is, you live his life. Is he a way for you to kind of assess your own personal and professional growth and kind of compare it to his? Or I wondered which of you is doing the better job of becoming the man you're supposed to be? And are you helped in your project by thinking of him in those terms each time you sit down to each year to tell another year of his story?
That's a great question. I think it's harder to have objectivity about your own personal growth, right? It's one of those things where sometimes you only know you've changed when somebody tells you, Yeah. It's like, because I'm just going through my life and the changes largely in my life recently have been very positive. So I'm, people have been saying nice things to me, which is nice. I don't take it for granted, because there was a time when that wasn't always that way. No. I think it's interesting. So I did an event the other night with the author Luanne Rice, and she was mentioning a Hemingway book. We're both Hemingway fans, and it was one of his posthumous books, Islands in the Stream. And I never really read it. I think I might have skimmed it at one stage. I think because I knew it had been published posthumously and I felt like it was not a real book. Mm. But I've been listening to it as an audio since she brought it up. And it has a lot of everything that I love about Hemingway in it. But it's so autobiographical in terms of not the plot, but the details. And it's actually made me aware of the fact of how far I've gotten away from that in my own series. That, you won't read about a fictional version of my favorite restaurant. Mm-hmm. Mike isn't going to go there. His world is increasingly his world, and it's different from mine. Mm-hmm. There's no COVID in Mike's world yet. Mm-hmm. That was very deliberate because when I was writing Dead by Dawn, this was the early days of the pandemic. And I said, it's too soon for me to know how to write about this. Mm-hmm. Now I'm working on the 13th book in the series and I still don't know quite how to handle it. Or if I will handle it, because it's an open question to me whether, one, it's fiction, and two, whether people want it. Mm-hmm. We as a world, we're kind of getting through a pretty horrible time. And is it something that people want to be encountering, when they pick up a novel that they're, taking out on their front porch to look at the lake? I don't know.
Right. Interesting question. I just had a brilliant question that evaporated from my mind here. So it may or may not return. There was something, I can go back to my notes here. There's a part in the new book, Danny Tate, who it seems is kind of Mike's erstwhile girlfriend. It's not clear what the relationship is. She has a health scare. She tells Mike life is too short to wait for things to fall into her lap. Maybe she's referring to him. And he responds, not if you learn to live in the moment. And he tells the reader, as we're reading it, that this principle is central to the way he lives his life, that he's living in the moment. And I mean, that's something that, you or I or anybody, depending on what path we're on spiritually or whatever, you try to do that. And at 70, I think I'm better at doing that than I was when I was 30. But is something like that where he's articulating at least a desire to live in the moment? Would that be more true of him in this book than it would have been in The Poacher's Son, and that he would be making that kind of becoming a better person or a more aware person?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that also tracks with sort of my own development as a person. Mike in the early books is entirely haunted by his past. it was no accident that I made him a history major at Colby, because he's haunted by his personal history most of all. And so, like a lot of people who are damaged emotionally, they manage to sort of simultaneously live in the past and the future, but the place that they don't live typically is in the present.
Right.
And the one place throughout the series where Mike is able to do that is in the outdoors. And that has always been true of me as well. It's the place where, you put a fly rod in my hand and put me on a trout stream, even if there are no trout, I get into this sort of state of calmness. My mind empties. I'm listening to everything. I'm noticing what I'm smelling. It's just a wonderful sense of being. And I realized, I think when I wrote those words that about Mike and living in the present, that without meaning to, I had been writing him into that kind of a character where he was thinking less about his own past. And it also gave me a way to differentiate him from Danny, who is a very ambitious person. I had not realized until they had that conversation that Mike was not particularly ambitious. That he did want to become a warden investigator. He is a warden investigator. He's enjoying where he is. He's just sort of appreciating his life. Danny is thinking about, okay, I want to be a sergeant soon.
Right.
How do I climb this ladder? And Mike has no aspirations for leadership in sort of the bureaucratic sense. And again, I didn't know that about him until I wrote that. And it's one of the wonderful things about writing fiction is just the way that you're, if in my mind, if I'm doing it right, I'm being surprised by these insights I have both to these characters, but also into myself.
Right. Do you think that you're a less ambitious in kind of a traditional way writer now than you were 12, 13 years ago in terms of putting a lot of weight in reviews and sales and things, sort of external reactions to your work as opposed to the work itself?
I'd like to say so, but I'm not sure I can.
That's an honest answer.
I'll tell you what, you can ask me that question once I'm on the New York Times bestseller list.
Okay, good,
then,
good. Yeah.
Once I've made that, we'll see. I don't have a lot of higher aspirations beyond that. There's not like a list of awards that are haunting me that I haven't won or whatever. But no, I think I'm really without sort of I kind of coming across it as a aspiring saint or anything, but I mean, I really do try to practice a lot of gratitude in my life.
Yeah.
And, I know how lucky I am to do what I do. My career, one of my earliest jobs was working for Maine Writers and Publishers Alliance, this nonprofit in the state of Maine. And it was wonderful because I got to know everybody, all the writers at that time. There have since been this incredible wave of huge talents into the state. Not all of whom I've met yet, but I was so ambitious for my writing back then, and it's interesting just to kind of contrast myself with who I was, because I don't know that I could have imagined, I think, one, what was going to happen to me, and, in terms of being able to sustain this career, or two, sort of how I would feel about it, in the sense that I really do have this, this sense of my good fortune, I mean, because I look around and I think of all the writers I've known, and many of them have done wonderful work. Some have, moved on to different things or whatever. There's just a small number of us, though, that actually make a living doing this.
Right.
And, my 24-year-old self would never have imagined that I was going to be one of them. I mean, I think I would have sort of dreamed that I could be one of them, but I don't think I expected to.
Yeah.
And so I look at my life now and say, wow, the fact is I get to do this, and I'm really lucky. It's I don't take it for granted.
Yeah, yeah. You somewhere in let's see. Oh, I think I saw something on your blog. You gave a shout out to Laurence Gonzales's Deep Survival: Who Lives, Who Dies, and Why, best nonfiction book on the subject of wilderness survival, and then I think in the story there's. I think Mike says humility is a key to his survival. He realizes that, and it sort of advances his ability to survive. But that intrigued me. I don't think of, if you're trying to survive some intense situation like this, humility is not the first thing that comes to mind. It's like, be a Superman. Do
yeah, I know. It surprised me too when I was reading that book.
And that was mentioned in the book, and that's how it got into the story.
Yeah, I don't remember how directly it was, but I'll give you an example of this. There's a scene in the novel which I think some readers might kind of shake their head at and wonder about, where Mike, in a very dire situation, remembers a story that Charlie told him of Charlie fleeing from poachers who were after him, diving into a pond and crawling up into a beaver den to hide. And Mike just bursts out laughing at the memory of it. And what Gonzales says is that sense of humor seems to be one of the universal features of people who are able to survive. Of course, it does take willpower, but it's not pure will. There's sort of a sense of realism, of only not getting too far ahead of yourself, of making the decision that you need to make at this moment, rather than letting your mind kind of get obsessed with everything that can go wrong. It was really interesting that way, because it was a commonality that I found. I mean, I think maybe humility isn't probably the word that they would have used, but there was a sense I kept finding among this kind of survival, entertainment culture that we these days, of people who, they had a tremendous sense of this survival instinct, but there was something about it that I related to as on a human level rather than as a superhuman thing. I know that's hard to kind of parse, but it often was, the guy who just was going to charge off across the desert under his force of will, who ends up running out of, dehydrating and dying of sunstroke, whereas it's somebody who's, sort of has a much more modest approach to it, in terms of
something right under his nose.
Right. Yeah. Finding water, under his nose, exactly, in a plant or whatever it is. So, it was, talk about what you were saying with Chuck Box, is the research is always so fun for these books. And that also is something I think that I would agree with him, that whatever research I have to do for a given book helps keep this all fresh for me. The book I'm working on now takes place offshore, and again, but not on a populated island, and it gives me an excuse to do a lot of sea kayaking.
Oh, good.
It's like, and yet another reason to be grateful, right?
Yeah, for sure. I was smiling because I think you said somewhere that people in southern Maine don't understand northern Maine, and it's hard for you to think of a story that you could set down here in Old Orchard Beach. But I actually thought of one, and because there was a big ruckus here between there's folks who are very concerned about a bird and
the piping plover.
Piping plovers.
Yep.
But the word that came down, and it went, all on Facebook, and we picked it up at our home in Cambridge, that they're not going to let dogs on the beach without leashes from April to September. Mm-hmm. And man, the dog people just came out of the woodwork, and the poor Old Orchard Beach council that had hearings where, it's pipers versus dogs and all this. and I could imagine Mike getting drawn in perhaps on behalf of the plovers to solve the murder of somebody's dog
your
or whatever.
District warden, I guarantee you, has put in a lot of hours on, Pine Point and Old Orchard Beach, and trying to primarily educate people rather than ticket them. That is a good story. Because
maybe it'd be hard to get it to a murder level, but
well, yeah. Well, that's the thing, of course, is with some of these stories, it's like if you take it to that next level, it's beginning to feel a little bit Murder, She Wrote, right?
Yeah.
The case of the
exactly
the canine.
The plover. Yeah. Have you ever had a chance to meet Angela Lansbury, the Murder She Wrote?
No, I never have. No, and those were filmed in north of San Francisco. There's I forget the name of the town up there. There's a town that sort of doubles for many New England towns, and they filmed multiple series and movies up there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Boy, that had a real run back in the 80s, I guess.
Oh, yeah. People, they're actually somebody still publishes Murder, She Wrote novels.
Oh.
Under the pen name of whatever her name was.
Oh, Jessica Fletcher.
Jessica Fletcher. It's most written by some mystery writer, and they sell volumes.
Oh, I bet. Amazing. Well,
I'm a real person. Read my book.
Yeah, exactly. And you're talking about a real state. I don't think that was a very accurate view of Maine that all those people, millions of people saw at Cabot Cove.
No.
I love the Shadow, the wolf dog. And I've had terrible sleep problems most of my life. And I finally went to somebody at Mass General that has worked up some sleep plan, and they prescribed gabapentin.
Oh, yes.
So every night I'm taking gabapentin, and that's what the vet gives Shadow to calm him down. And I thought, should I be concerned that I'm taking medicine that they would also prescribe to a wolf to keep it from eating somebody? Yeah,
he's a big wolf too. So whatever dose he's getting,
probably less of a dose.
Yeah, that is funny. Again, that was one of these things. I have a veterinary friend, and had to explain to him the situation, and he said, okay, this is what we would do, and it, again, that's been one of the fun things about these books is getting to know people who become resources, and in some cases friends,
Yeah.
I've gotten tours of the Maine State Crime Lab, and I've gotten up in helicopters to go count moose.
Wow.
I had a guy take me to one of these Maine seabird islands that I'm writing about now. And his job that day, half of the island is protected sanctuary for these nesting terns, not piping plovers, but different terns. And the other half is privately owned. The people on the privately owned half have sheep. And when the terns are nesting, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service have to round up a bunch of volunteers to go out there. And so I spent the day herding the sheep to the south end.
Oh, how cool.
It was cool. This is all, I think that's one of these are all opportunities, to have experiences that, again, I never would have imagined having.
you've had a chance just to experience your state in a way. I mean, if you'd stayed at Down East Magazine, you would have covered a lot of stories. Mm-hmm. But I have a feeling that going deeply into a fictional character, it's almost like you got a chance to dive deeper into Maine than maybe a journalist doing a monthly magazine would be able to do.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I was writing The Poacher's Son, my first book, I was still a junior editor at Down East, and it was a different magazine. It still remains a very optimistic magazine. You know, people used to think of it as Pollyannish. I think it's a little bit more three-dimensional than it used to be about Maine, but it's going to project a largely positive image because that's what the readership wants. Back then it was even more so. And here I am, a Maine kid, you know, I'd grown up in Maine and so there, you know, and knew, and I have a lot of poverty in my family and knew all of these other pieces, the other sides to Maine that they were never going to write about.
Right.
In the magazine. And so I think one of the motivations for me to write The Poacher's Son and then the subsequent books has been to say, hey, look, nobody's writing about this.
Yeah, let's get real.
Not just other fiction writers, but even journalists in some cases. So,
yeah, that's a lot fuller thing. I see that your wife is a poet, Kristen Lindquist, and you're going to do a mixed genre reading of your work July 25th at the Denmark Maine Arts Center. It made me wonder. Actually, I mean, I've got an MFA too, so I know how to workshop something. And I saw a sentence somewhere in the book. It said, softwood hisses as steam escapes from the burning gas. Some nice alliteration there, evoking the sound of the fire. And does Kristen ever get to weigh in and kind of poeticize some of your writing, and you get to make her poems a little scarier? Or what's the back and forth within the house?
I will say that there have been just a handful, less than 5, where she'll come up with some sort of metaphor and I'll say, can I use that, please?
Yeah.
And I know one offhand, which is, oak trees do not lose their leaves in the fall. They'll hang on to them. They'll turn brown, they'll get brittle, and they'll only begin to really fall off. Same with beech trees. Once the new buds start coming in and sort of push them off.
Oh,
and that's typically in the spring. And I don't know if it's true across all species of oak, but I know it is with red oaks, for instance. And Kristen had a thing where she was comparing these fluttering dead oak leaves to prayer flags. But I said, I really want to use that. Can I use that one? And so she let me do that. But she's a great reader because she's a poet.
Yeah, I'm sure.
She doesn't. I try not to lean on her too much from the style standpoint, but she certainly catches me on the clunker sentences. And
yeah, that's good resource to have.
Yeah. Is
this the first time you will have had a joint reading with her, each reading your own work?
No, we've actually done this a number of times, and we both enjoy it because I think it's a little bit different for both of us from the kinds of stuff we would do separately.
Yeah. And
we find that readers really, or the audience really likes it too, because quite often there's a lot of banter back and forth. One of the ponds that was the inspiration for The Poacher's Son, it was a lake. It's Spencer Lake, is a place we visited a lot. We had access to a camp there, a friend of ours had. And so Kristen wrote a lot of poems about Spencer Lake. And so we alternate where I might read a chapter.
Oh.
And then she reads the poems that she wrote that were inspired by, in some cases, the same trips we made up there.
Cool.
And it's interesting. We remember things differently,
Yeah.
And I think that's it. As I say, a lot of people who come to these sort of appreciate that part too.
Yeah, a lot of married couples are enjoying that back and forth.
Yeah, when you have two writers who are married to each other and are sort of bickering in a friendly way.
Yeah.
How is that different from anything else? And so,
yeah.
I don't want to encourage people to come to Denmark to watch us bicker.
No. Well, let's see. So June of next year will be the 13th. Can you say anything? We said some about it. It's anything else you want to mention about what readers can expect in that book that's coming?
Yeah, I think I can. I wish I could disclose the title now, but I can't because it has not been fully approved by my publisher. There's this very formal system in which I work with my editor, I work with my agent to come up with something that we like, and then he has to bring it to a fairly large group that includes lots of salespeople and marketing people, and they vet it and say, okay, this is going to be the title. But hopefully soon I'll have that. But as I said, this is going to be a saltwater book. I figured a way to get Mike offshore in a way that it's not Mike on vacation. It starts out a little bit like that, but he quickly is sort of called upon to be, Maine Fish and Wildlife's investigator on a murder case, because it's a murder mystery. So you can be sure that's going to happen.
Right. And, that's not a spoiler.
It's going to have a lot of stuff that I haven't had chance to work in yet. So, for instance, our seabirds, puffins, and there's controversy about offshore windmills and lobstermen having whales get tangled in their gear. So lots of stuff that I really haven't touched yet. I'm going to be working into this book.
Yeah.
Plus it'll be a relationship book. Mike will not be on his own. I won't tell you who he's with. But,
well, now, have you solved the calendar problem you have that you've had one book a month and you've had 12? Did you make up a new month, or how are you going to, what's going to happen there?
Let me tell you what happened actually. So I had originally thought I would write 12, one set in each month of the year. I finished my December book, which was the last one remaining, and that's Dead by Dawn, which is simultaneously my most suspenseful book and my Christmas book.
Yeah, right. Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas. But that left me, having finished the calendar year. And I will tell you, I went through a month where I said, well, okay, I have to find some new strategy of dealing with this. What am I going to do to sort of shift gears? Am I going to start writing in the third person? Am I going to have a book that stretches over multiple months? And I still may somewhere down the road. But in this case, I said, you know what? I'm going to write a good book.
Yeah. You freed yourself from that box.
Yes. Yeah, I think so. So often, not just in writing, but in life, we're responsible for the boxes that we put ourselves in. And they're imaginary.
Well, this one had a good run. It got you to write 12 novels.
It did.
Awesome. I've been speaking with Paul Doiron, author of Dead by Dawn, the 12th novel in his Game Warden Mike Bowditch series, released this week by Minotaur Books. Thanks very much, Paul.
Thank you, Len. This was a pleasure and a privilege.
Well, I really enjoyed talking with Paul, and I hope you enjoyed listening in on our conversation. One of the things that is most memorable to me is when he talked about how he said, I know how lucky I am to do what I do. And this is kind of realizing, wow, I've had 12 of these books, and he's working on the 13th. And when he started, there was absolutely no expectation that he would be able to make a living doing this. And so he did something pretty brave at the start of it. And that sense of how a project evolves over time, probably what resonated about that with me is this podcast, which kind of a similar length of time. It's coming up on 13 years this month, actually. And when I first started, I thought, well, I'm really catch this Kindle wave, and I'm going to talk about the new technology, and I had quite a sort of evangelist sense of it. And I thought, maybe this will be a really big podcast someday. And that kind of ambition is good for getting something started. And when you're someone as young as I was at the time, 57 or so, you look at things differently as the years go on. And now, as I do this, I have that same sense of good fortune that each week I get to, do a lot of research and then have a conversation like that with an author or somebody who's doing something interesting in technology. Basically, anybody that seems of interest to me, I get a chance to have a conversation, then share it with people that have followed along and are interested in it enough to listen and talk about it at the clubhouse room and things like that. So the ambition just sort of morphs into gratitude. Maybe that's what I saw happening in his case, and it certainly is similar to my situation with the Kindle Chronicles. The other thing I got a lot out of when we were talking about survival tips that he had picked up and woven into this real survival story for his character, and the idea that a sense of humor is part of something that people who survive extreme circumstances share, and a realism, not getting too far ahead of themselves, and being human versus being superhuman. That seemed to really offer something to think about, because when I think about getting through life, getting through a difficult time, and what does it mean to be human versus some extreme version of myself or some needlessly high expectation of perfectionism, as opposed to just figuring out what needs to be done right now. And I also really enjoyed the fix that he got himself into by having each of his books be set in a different month. And I'm sure when he started doing that, he wasn't thinking ahead and said, well, what happens when I run out of months? And I saw elsewhere in an interview when he was really just sort of up against, well, now what do I do? What month do I put the 13th book in? And I loved how when I asked him that question, he said, we're responsible for the boxes that we put ourselves in. And he put himself in a creative box there, which is motivating. And I put myself in all kinds of creative boxes, one of which is I do the podcast every week, and that's a creative box I'm not willing to give up or free myself from anytime soon. But there's others, it has to be 58, or what was the thing? It had to be almost 45 minutes long, 44:58. And that was a good box to be in for a while. But then I thought, really, do I have to spend an extra 15 minutes on a podcast hitting that mark? No, I don't think so. And other things that have evolved. And the way he describes the feeling of getting set free from that box he set for himself, he said, I'm just going to write a good book. And I'm just going to try to have a good show. I'm going to have a good podcast. I've talked to Darlene. I'm hoping that on July 25th, when Paul and his wife Kristen will be in Denmark, Maine. There's a bunch of towns up in Maine that are named after countries like Norway and Denmark, and so it's about an hour's drive from here in Old Orchard Ocean Park. So July 25th at 4 p.m. at the Denmark Arts Center. Maybe we'll have a chance to hear the back and forth between Paul and his poet wife Kristen. That's it for this week. My guest next week will be another author, a very different kind of genre, interesting book that I'm reading. It's Jessica Chiarella. She's the author of The Lost Girls, a novel available for pre-order with release by G.P. Putnam's Sons on July 6th. I get a pretty steady supply of nice invitations from Big Five publishers and others to interview authors. And this one caught my attention, and I ended up saying, yes, I'd like to do an interview because of a podcasting connection. The book description at Amazon says, in part, it's been more than 20 years since Marty Reese's sister Maggie disappeared. Only 8 years old at the time, Marty can't remember what happened, just that Maggie got into a car and never returned. After years of grief and countless false leads, Marty is coping as best she can, abandoning her marriage, drinking to forget, and documenting her never-ending search via a true crime podcast. But when the podcast becomes an unexpected hit and Marty thinks she's finally ready to put it all behind her, a mysterious woman calls with new information that could lead her down a dangerous path. Well, for someone whose podcast has so far not generated that kind of drama, Jessica's story made me curious, and I'm thoroughly enjoying what I've read to this point in the advanced reader copy that I received. A scary book about podcasting. What could make better beach reading? I know that Monday, July 5th is a holiday, but I'm going to stick to our Clubhouse schedule of having a room Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time for the Clubhouse conversation. I think about 6 of us last week had a great conversation, and so maybe if it's a holiday, some folks will be able to attend who couldn't otherwise. So if it's Monday at 1 p.m., there will be people talking about the Kindle Chronicles show from the Friday before. I've got a little bit of a scheduling challenge because at 10 a.m. that day on Monday, the big event around here is the Ocean Park 4th of July Parade. And as usual, I will be donning my red T-shirt, which says Ocean Park Marching Kazoo Band, and we will be playing patriotic songs and old favorites as we process through the quiet streets of the village. Unlike in prior years, I will not be posting video or on Instagram or Facebook as my See You in September project continues. I think 3 weeks today is since I decided to stay off Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and to drop all of my news subscriptions except for the paper subscription to The Economist, which I'm really liking. I did sneak on to Instagram today because there was an amazing video of Jeff Bezos telling Wally Funk, who is 82, that she will be the 4th passenger on Blue Origin's first crewed flight on July 20th. Now, this woman, Wally Funk, was a participant in the Mercury 13 program, which recruited 13 women astronauts in the 1960s, but none of them ever had a chance to fly into space. Jeff wrote in his comment on the video, "It's time." What a story. That is going to be an amazing 4 minutes of weightlessness in space with his brother there and the person who spent millions of dollars buying one of the auction seats. I think there are 2 more seats available. I don't know who else is going to be up there. Still time to invite someone who's been podcasting for 13 years about Jeff Bezos and all things Amazon. So I'll keep my expectations to a human level on that one. Thanks for listening. It's a quiet night looking out at the ocean here at Ocean Park, and feel grateful to have had a Mainer on the show, and to talk to you next week. Bye.